Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Funds to solve the Santee Sioux Nation's long-standing lack of clean drinking water are caught in political limbo. The Nebraska tribe needs a pipeline to get around water wells contaminated with manganese. Federal staff and funding cuts, political wrangling, and bureaucratic inaction all play a part in preventing citizens from Santee Sioux and other tribes from accessing a basic necessity most Americans take for granted. We'll hear more after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says he wants to improve Indigenous people's access to traditional foods. Standing outside a tribal health center in Fairbanks, Alaska, Kennedy told reporters last week he's collecting ideas, but is not exactly sure how to achieve that goal.
I'm trying to figure out ways I can use my agency and my relationships with the other secretaries to return those foods.
Kennedy made a few stops at healthcare facilities in the state. In Anchorage, he went so far as to call processed foods' impact on Native health part of a, quote, genocide. The center where Kennedy spoke in Fairbanks is operated by Tanana Chiefs Conference, or TCC. The nonprofit tribal organization aims to support health and social service needs of its 42 members, 37 of which are federally recognized tribes. TCC Chief Brian Ridley says the secretary's pledge is just a starting point, but encouraging.
He seems totally on board with working with us, trying to do what we can in those areas to try to get back to our traditional foods so that they're healthier. And it's just a matter of working with him and the senators going forward on trying to find a way to actually make that happen.
The press event took place after Kennedy toured the health center with Alaska's U.S. Senators Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan. Light Up Navajo is an annual aid program meant to help electrify rural and remote households across the Navajo Nation, the largest reservation in the U.S. As KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrozio reports, the project reached a major milestone earlier this month.
With help from nearly 4 public and private utilities spanning 20 states, the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, or NTUA, says volunteers installed 41 miles of power lines and hooked up 196 homes this year alone, now surpassing 1,000 dwellings in all. Typically conducted over the summer months, Light Up Navajo began as a 6-week pilot in 2019 between NTUA and the American Public Power Association. 6 years later, it's now a 14-week endeavor. NTUA estimates about 10,000 households are still in the dark. For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrozio.
A nonprofit in New Mexico that supports Native American communities wants Congress to restore funding for an employment and training program. KUNM's Jeanette Didios has more.
Among ongoing federal funding cuts, the Native Professional Advancement Center is urging Congress to reverse a budget proposal that would eliminate money for Native workforce training programs. The center's board chair, Lorraine Edmo, recently sent a letter to Democratic Representative Rosa DeLauro, a ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee, requesting action to restore $60 million. Executive Director of the center, Darius Lee, says the elimination of federal funding, quote, undermines decades of progress and violates the government's responsibility to honor tribal sovereignty. According to a press release by the organization, the federal budget proposal by the Trump administration is calling for the elimination of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and instead creating a new state-controlled block grant called Make America Skilled Again. If created, it would cut tribes and nonprofits from direct access to workforce resources, force tribes to compete with the state for funding, and shut down culturally specific support systems that have helped Native people earn employment. The House Appropriations Committee is scheduled to possibly take another vote on this portion of the budget on September 2nd. For National Native News, I'm Jeanette Didios.
And I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by Drummond Woodsum, a full-service law firm whose nationally recognized tribal nations practice provides services to tribal nations and their enterprises and to companies that do business with tribes across the country. More at dwmlaw.com. Support by the Colorado Plateau Foundation, supporting Native-led initiatives protecting plateau lands, waters, and cultures by building networks, community, and organizational capacity. Grant proposals accepted through September 5th at coloradoplateaufoundation.org.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Hundreds of abandoned, uncapped wells on the Navajo Nation reservation threaten drinking water for residents. Some Navajo citizens haul in water because the water from their wells show high levels of contaminants like benzene. It's not clear what the original purpose was for the wells, but it's in an area with significant oil and gas drilling. The sprawling, mostly rural reservation already suffers from a lack of water infrastructure and environmental contamination from arsenic and uranium. The Santee Sioux Nation in Nebraska is another tribe grappling to find a source of clean water. The solution is costly, and tribal leaders have spent years navigating a shifting, bureaucratic maze. The Biden administration allocated millions of dollars for tribal water projects. That money has now all but dried up. Join our conversation today about tribal water access. You can call us at 1-800-996-2848. That number again is 1-800-996-2848 or just 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from Salt Lake City, Utah is Heather Tanana. She is the initiative lead of the Universal Access to Clean Water for Tribal Communities and a law professor at the University of Denver. She is Dene. Heather, good morning and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Morning. Thanks for having me, Sean.
You bet. Joining us from Albuquerque, New Mexico is Jerry Redfern. He is a reporter for Capital in Maine. Jerry, hello and welcome to our show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Also joining us is Nicole Horseherder. She is the executive director of To Nijoni Ani. She is Dene. Nicole, hello and welcome to you as well.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And joining us from the Santee Sioux Nation in Santee, Nebraska is Cameron Runnels. He is the vice chairman of the Santee Sioux Nation. Vice Chairman Runnels, welcome back to Native America Calling. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Heather, I want to begin with you. Let's talk about money that was previously allocated by the Biden administration for water access on the Navajo Nation. Do you know about how much money was originally set aside, and have any of those funds been used yet?
Yeah, good question, right? So we had the bipartisan infrastructure law and then also the Inflation Reduction Act. And both of those were just so monumental and historic, really Congress recognizing and honoring their treaty and trust responsibility to tribes and that they failed to invest in infrastructure previously. So across all the different agencies, it totaled about $13 billion in tribal infrastructure funding. And a large part of that went to Indian Health Service and their sanitation facilities construction program. That alone was $3.5 billion. Money went to reclamation, EPA. Each of these agencies serve really important roles and play a different part when we're looking at water access. So again, a lot of great money, a lot of optimism, projects that weren't previously funded looks like they're going to get through. And then, like you mentioned or indicated, real change with the new administration.
Right. Can you give us some more details with regard to how these major cuts of funding there at the federal level, not just funds, but also programs, how does that affect what was already planned there for the Navajo Nation specifically?
Yeah, well, a lot of halts. So IHS, and to be clear, we're still seeing exactly how it's going to play out. But, just looking at the president's proposed budget, He is suggesting that Reclamation's Water Smart program be totally eliminated. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, Tribal Climate Resilience, eliminated. EPA's Clean Water, Drinking Water, State Revolving Funds, tribes get a set aside of both of those. Really important as well for just rural and small communities across the U.S. We're looking at 86 to 91% decrease. One real example on the ground is with the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project. This is a project that's been going on for years to bring water out to Navajo Nation, Hickory Apache Nation, the city of Gallup. There are some additional funds that was going to finally help see that project be completed. That's been halted. And so it's really put a big delay. And the biggest thing is uncertainty, not knowing for sure, what projects will be funded, what money will actually be allocated by Congress.
All right. Thank you, Heather. Jerry, I want to go to you now. And you recently wrote an article in Capital, Maine that reveals the existence of hundreds of abandoned wells on the Navajo Nation. What can you tell us about their origin?
Not a whole lot, unfortunately. These are truly abandoned and orphaned wells. In a lot of the cases, all anybody really knows is that there's a pipe in the ground and it leads to something, but nobody necessarily knows what. That corner of the Navajo Nation is one of the first places in the state of New Mexico where people drilled for oil. Sort of the century anniversary was in 2023, in 2023. So some of those wells are probably more than 100 years old. And there just aren't very good records going back that far as to what a lot of these things are.
Now, you talked with the Navajo Nation Environmental Protection Agency's Water Quality Department about these abandoned wells, and what's been the biggest hurdle that the Navajo Nation has faced in creating and protecting access to clean water?
I think in this particular instance, I think on the Navajo, I should be clear. I report on the oil and gas industry and sort of its intersection with politics. I'm not really qualified to talk about the Navajo Nation and water issues as a whole, but I can talk about this a little bit here. And I think that the biggest issue they have deals with funding. It takes a lot of people to monitor what the oil and gas industry does to sort of police the oil and gas industry. It's a problem that the state of New Mexico has. The state itself doesn't have enough people, honestly, to follow everything that goes on. So when problems come up like this in a place like the Navajo Nation, I think that the Navajo agencies themselves are kind of relying on federal agencies to step up and deal and pay attention to the treaty obligations that are there for environmental protections and water protections. And I think that's kind of what folks are waiting to have happen.
Jerry, is there a clear link to these abandoned wells and the contamination in people's drinking water on the Navajo Nation?
Not exactly. So we don't actually know exactly how many of these wells are out there. That's kind of problem number one. Problem number two is that these wells haven't all been tested. I only know about this story in the first place because of a random semi-buried EPA report where an EPA crew went out and happened to test a few wells back in 2018. And the report came out in 2019, and not a lot was done about it then. And in that, they figured out that some of the wells were previously oil production wells. Some of the wells were probably water wells, but they're not necessarily pumping up clean water. And I think perhaps a bigger overall answer to your question there about these wells is that all of them that were tested, there was a scientist from the Environmental Working Group who looked at the report and looked at the numbers and told me, you don't even want to touch that water. That's for all of them, really. Okay. So none of the wells are clean, but we don't really even know what their history is. We don't know what's coming out of them. We don't know how many there are. And a lot more questions, really, than there are answers.
Okay, but if the testing has revealed that you don't even want to touch that water, What can you tell us about the actual contaminants that people are seeing?
It totally depends upon the well. So wells that were known to have been oil-producing wells generally have things like benzene, some arsenic, lots of sulfites. There are all sorts of other trace chemicals and minerals that show up. Think of particular importance to the Navajo Nation. There are definitely small amounts of uranium that show up here and there in the reports. So none of this stuff is stuff that you want to drink. Things like sulfites and the amounts that they were reported, they're going to make you sick, but they probably won't kill you, which I think is probably cold comfort. But I mean, things like arsenic and benzene, they're distinctly bad for your health and can lead to cancer.
Okay, and in your article, you mentioned that, or it's reported that some of these contaminants can also be very harmful for livestock. Jerry, who's responsible ultimately for overseeing and mitigating this contamination?
Yeah, that's a good question that I think probably somebody from the Navajo Nation needs to chime in on and say exactly. There's a lot of, as I think most of your listeners probably know, there's a lot of overlap between federal agencies doing work on tribal lands and then tribes themselves who often have sort of mirror agencies doing somewhat similar sorts of work. So I think the lead in any of this is probably the tribe, but I think that the heavy lifting that needs to be done probably has to come from the federal government just because of the scope of the problem.
All right, we're speaking with Jerry Redfern. He is a reporter for Capital in Maine, and we also spoke with Heather Tanana, who is the initiative lead of the Universal Access to Clean Water for Tribal Communities. And we have more guests on the show we're going to talk to after this short break. And the topic, again, we are talking about contaminated water that is impacting tribal communities. The Navajo Nation, the Santee Sioux Nation in Nebraska are two examples, and we have guests on the show who are qualified to talk about those situations. And we also want to hear from our listeners today, so give us a call. Maybe you live in a community where you have water contamination issues, or you're concerned about the quality of the drinking water where you are. Give us a call. You can share an insight, you can share a comment, you can ask a question, whatever's on your mind with regard to this topic today. 1-800-996-2848. That number is 1-800-996-2848. Give us a call. Our producers are standing by, and they're waiting for you to pick up that phone. 1-800-99-NATIVE.
The tribal gaming industry just posted another record revenue year, approaching a combined $50 billion. That money goes into tribal healthcare, infrastructure, and citizens per cap. But there are some warnings on the horizon in the now mature industry. We'll talk more about it on the next Native America Calling.
My name is Tammy, and I'm a member of the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians. Smoking gave me heart disease. I used to think of cigarette smoking as something that only affected me. Then at just 44 years old, I had to look into my mom's eyes on the way into emergency heart surgery and tell her, "Mommy, I promise I won't make you bury me." My tip is, think about the people in your life who love you. They go through the pain too, maybe even more than you do.
The people you love are worth quitting for. You can quit. For free help, call 1-800-QUIT-NOW. A message from the CDC.
Thank you for tuning in today to Native America Calling. We're talking about access to clean water in Native communities. Is your water safe to drink? What kinds of threats jeopardize your access to clean water? Give us a call, 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. One of our guests today, Jerry Redfern, is a reporter for Capital in Maine, just wrote an article about water contamination on the Navajo Nation. And Jerry, you interviewed a number of Navajo people who are dealing with this contaminated water. What did they tell you? What are their concerns? What are the risks they're facing? How's it impacting their lifestyle?
They were all shocked, which kind of shocked me. In one particular case, I spoke with a woman named Loretta Johnson, and she and I and another person drove to one of the wells that was on the list, and she recognized that it's a place that she'd gone for a few years to pick up water to take to water her cattle that she ran with her husband, and didn't realize that it was possibly an old repurposed oil well. And she certainly didn't know the sort of pollution that was coming out of it. Checking the list that the EPA, the testing that the EPA had done previously on this particular well, it's contaminated with benzene and with an incredibly high amount of sulfites. And she was extremely concerned about what that then did to the cattle she had and whoever bought the cattle after the fact. And she herself brought up questions about people, eating those cattle. What sort of effect does that have? I think these are reasonable questions.
Mm-hmm. Heather Tanana, back to you. What are some possible solutions here? What really needs to happen in order to get this water where it needs to be? And also, I'm curious, how big a risk is it? Is this a huge crisis? Is this more kind of middle of the road? How concerned, how urgent is this issue right now at this date and time?
Well, I think it's critical and it's impacting everyone. The average American just takes for granted that they can turn on a tap in their home and drink the water that comes out of it. And they can keep that tap on for however long they need. They can take showers, they can clean their house, they can water their yard. That is not the case for a lot of Native American households. Dig Deep, U.S. Water Alliance, they issued a report a couple years ago finding that Native Americans' households were 19 times more likely to not have running water in their home, to have that pipe delivery. If you go to tribes like Navajo Nation, it jumps to 67 times, and they're flowing water. And exactly like Loretta, they're using a water source for all their needs. A lot of times this is unregulated groundwater. They don't know what it is or what they're drinking. And yet then we have studies like from, I think it was University of New Mexico, finding Navajo babies born today with traces of uranium in their blood. And so these contaminants, whether they're naturally occurring or were exacerbated from energy development, they're in the ground, they're in our food, they're in our water. And so going back to what can be done about this, I think absolutely the federal government has a key legal responsibility to ensure that Native Americans, placed on reservations, those are supposed to be permanent homelands. We heard earlier a little snippet from the Secretary Kennedy about wanting to increase access to traditional foods. Well, that's going to require water to grow those foods and ensure that then those foods are safe to eat. And so I don't think we should be letting the federal government off the hook. I think they are legally required to fund the programs that they recognize were there because of treaty trust responsibility, like Indian Health Service, right? That was part of a treaty obligation to elevate and provide for the health of Native Americans. Water access, sanitation is integral to that. Now, that said, with the administration, the cuts, and the political environment right now, we don't let the feds off the hook, but we are seeing other partnerships step up to be able to address the immediate needs and concerns. Local government, state government, philanthropic organizations, even like the church, LDS Church, Latter-day Saints, partnered with Blanding City, state of Utah, Navajo Nation to help bring water to a small community in southern Utah, Westwater. So we have to do everything that we can, but we don't let the feds off the hook.
All right. Thank you, Heather. Let's hear now from Nicole Horseherder, who joins us from Flagstaff, Arizona. She's the executive director of To-Najoni Ani. And Nicole, I want to ask you your thoughts here with regard to what possibly could be done. And I'm curious to, is it as simple as just plugging these wells up? What kind of actual engineering needs to go into addressing the contaminated water in these wells? And I'm also curious to hear your thoughts with regard to whose responsibility it is to clean these wells and this water.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a big question. Our work at To-Najoni began with a lot of coal mining issues, which of course also takes a lot of water. And it's here on Black Mesa, where I'm from, it's depleted both the shallow and the deep aquifers. So that leads me to the next thing, which is that the Navajo Nation relies not just on surface water, but relies on groundwater as well. So across the Navajo Nation, there's a lot of aquifers, and underneath, as waters flow, there's no boundaries. Perhaps maybe some places are more permeable than others, but still, we don't quite understand, even scientists don't understand the way that water flows underground. So when industry comes in and taps in and looks for whether it be oil or gas or even coal, they're going to go through a couple of different water sources as they're getting down to whatever it is that they're actually looking for. This really changes the flow of the groundwater. So I think one of the things that I know that we try to, that we struggle with is a change in policy. When industry comes in, they're not just responsible for the work at the moment, trying to reach for whatever it is, whatever mineral or oil, gas that they're looking for, but also what's the follow-up? Every single time industry drills a well, there should be some clear policies, some clear regulation about what happens to that well once it's drilled and how it has to be monitored afterwards. And that's one of the parts that both the feds, whether it's EPA or OSM, falls short, Department of Interior, and the Navajo Nation. In my experience, we deal when we're dealing with coal mining and trying to make sure that the shallow and the deep aquifers are reclaimed, we're dealing with an arm of the federal government, which is the Office of Surface Mining, sits directly underneath the Department of Interior, supposed to regulate mining operations. And once mining is done, they're supposed to return, they're supposed to go back in and reclaim and clean up. And according to the lease agreements in this particular place that I live, the lease agreements basically say that the lands have to be returned in as good a condition as received. Now, who's responsible for making sure that that happens? It's supposed to be a coordinated effort between the Navajo Nation and the federal agencies and the Department of Interior. I just don't see this happening, and one of it is funding. There's not enough funding for it, and there's not enough monitoring, and there's just not enough adherence to the actual regulation itself. So I see federal agencies falling short. I think it's the responsibility ultimately of the Navajo Nation to make sure that regulation is being followed and that they themselves have to step it up and make sure that they're monitoring every single operation. Now, this takes money, this takes dollars, and that's something that I'm aware that the Navajo Nation doesn't have. So that's something that we really need to focus on. I mean, right now, when you listen to the news on the Navajo Nation, you're always hearing about, like, say, veteran housing, whatever it is, but it's usually not, we need more money so that we can monitor and make sure that our waters are safe, that there's enough money to mitigate orphaned wells, there's enough money, and in the new leases and contracts with the industry, this has to be included. You can't just stop at the Navajo Nation is going to receive this amount of revenues for this new project. It has to be beyond that. It has to be money for reclamation, money for cleanup, money to monitor into the future, money to come back and redo something if it wasn't done right in the first place, that kind of thing. That's where our thinking has to go, because as potable water sources diminish, the future of our nation is at stake. And that's where we have to be thinking.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. 1-800-99-NATIVE, the number to call if you would like to join this conversation today. Let us know about any water issues, water quality issues you might have where you live in your community. 1-800-996-2848. That's the number to call to share your thoughts, share your insights. Let's pivot now from the Navajo Nation and let's talk about what's happening on the Santee Sioux Nation in Nebraska. And to do that, we have Vice Chairman Cameron Reynolds of the Santee Sioux Nation. And Vice Chairman, thank you again for joining the show. And you were actually on our show about 2 years ago, and you were talking about a no-drink order that was issued by the EPA in 2019 with regard to water in wells on the Santee Reservation. Can you give a brief update for our listeners?
Yes, yeah, and good to be here again. So just to summarize really quickly from that last call, 5 years now, the tribe is under this not to consume your water order from the EPA. And still, as really nothing has really changed since our last conversation. I guess the only thing you probably could say that's maybe a little bit different is the state of Nebraska actually, the state legislature actually stepped up before the state or the federal government, which was surprising for us, with a $9 million grant, which has helped us a lot with planning and engineering cost. Because like I mentioned, this is a potentially $40 to $50 million project to bring this water line here. And again, like I said before, if anyone's not listening, we drilled 20 different locations across the reservation here, using planes with GPR and different imaging systems looking for pockets of water, and nothing was either had quality water or quantity water, which left us in a situation where you build this water treatment plant that comes with maintenance cost and operation cost that we can't sustain over a long-term period. And the tribal council wanted a long-term solution, instead of kicking this down the road, 20 years, 30 years to our children. And the solution was bringing this water line here, which I think you described it best in your first comments, a political and funding maze that kind of created. And it's created a lot of uncertainty, I guess, what's going to happen with this new administration came in, what are we going to be able to get this funding now? And what happens with, can we go back? Can we go back to IHS's proposal? And that's an option that the tribal council is unfortunately just doesn't want, just because it's not long term. And like the things that I mentioned earlier about having to sustain those costs, we're just unable to do that. And their proposal for that water treatment facility just didn't address a lot of different things either. Okay. And that was another reason why we did it.
Vice Chairman, I want to ask you. Yeah, I want to ask you. What types of impacts are you seeing there with regard to people and this water? Manganese, concentrations of manganese in the water. Why is that a problem specifically, and how can it impact drinking water that people use to cook with, or people that shower with it? What are you seeing there in the community?
Well, I guess one thing that is kind of concerning, and unfortunately we can't prove it, but there's a lot of suspicion that points to it. There's a high number of cancer rates here in the community, especially with young people. I think right now, and this is coming from a community of 600 people, we have 5 people under the age of 25 that have cancer. We've had a child, a 4-year-old child, die of cancer here just a couple of years ago. And a lot of suspicion, I guess, is pointed towards, is this water related? There's a lot of illness with the stomach bacteria. It's called H. pylori. It has to do with like wastewater in your water supply. And is that, there was 20 cases of that this past year. And you can't boil the water. You can't, because it causes the manganese to get worse. There's also been high radiation levels found in our water, extremely high. I know that's found naturally, but extremely high levels to the point where potentially is not safe either. It's just an unfortunate situation we find ourselves in, and trying to get a solution with funding, of course, has always been the problem. It's just been like you were saying, a real political battle, unfortunately, and we're still find ourselves in it right now with no clear answer or solution in sight, I guess.
Okay. We will continue our conversation with Vice Chairman Cameron Runnels of the Santee Sioux Nation. And we have the phone lines open for listeners who would like to join our conversation as well. 1-800-996-2848. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Yat nts khahot edo del gido nen case nenegi yego betzil do del nzengo tsadan ane ent ego eya hot del khahot del nilgo eya at khida bech hadist nzengo azal empelnahas ago oku eya na del kedo del Indian healthcare provider besh outed in case beach de healthcare.gov/coverage besh baudil 1-800-318-2596. A message from Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
You have it tuned to Native America Calling. We're talking about tribal water infrastructure. Is your tribal government working to improve its water access? Or is there a nonprofit or another organization that does that work locally? Tell us about it. We're at 1-800-996-2848. Right now we're talking with Vice Chairman of the Santee Sioux Nation, Cameron Runnels. His tribe has been under a no-drink order for 6 years, almost 6 years now. It was issued by the EPA. And Vice Chairman, I want to ask you just, how is this impacting the lifestyle of your tribal citizens? 6 years now, I mean, having to haul water or get bottled water, what kind of inconveniences does that pose? Is there financial help for people who need bottled water? How does that all work?
Yeah, so we do deliver bottled water to people, our households here. I think every couple of weeks, each home gets 8 cases of bottled water. That's to about 270 tribal homes. And then also to our community school, our K-12 school, our Head Start. But sometimes that doesn't last a house. So I think each household probably has to plan to, purchasing at least a couple of more cases of water a week by themselves, maybe even more than that. You have to remember, you can't cook with the water, or at least you're not supposed to. So, if you want to cook some soup or something, you're filling up your pot with, 10 bottles of water, 12 bottles of water, whatever it is. So there's that aspect to it where, that might not seem like a whole lot, having to purchase, a couple of cases of water, but, just to try and cook or clean, to brush your teeth with or whatever it is. But it's definitely an impact on people. And I think there's another impact that, like, people don't think about when visitors come down here, we have to tell them, hey, don't drink our water. We had our annual Wachipi or our celebration, our powwow, a month ago, and we had to announce to all the food stands and all the people, here's a case of water or a couple of cases of water for your food stand because, you can't cook. You're not supposed to do these things with our water, and then you kind of so you have like almost like an embarrassment, I guess, that, this is an issue. And so we have to deal with that too. And
does this impact every single tribal citizen there on the reservation, or are there some folks that do have good drinking water, or is it everyone?
I would say the vast majority of people are impacted, and the people who aren't on the water line, we're finding on individual home wells that there's high amounts of manganese found in those wells too. It just for some reason in this area, the manganese is just at such a high level, and it's a naturally occurring mineral that unfortunately somehow just seeps into our water supply. And there might be maybe a handful that don't deal with it, but yeah, the vast majority have this issue.
All right, Vice Chairman, thank you for coming on this show today, and please keep us updated on how this all progresses, okay?
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Let's go to the phones. We have Jen, who is listening online in East Texas. Hello, Jen. You're on the air.
Thanks so much, Sean, for taking my call. It's always sad to hear about another nation, like the Santeen Nation, having such water issues when I've personally been introduced and experienced the water issue on the Navajo Nation as I was visiting in Nicole's family's home, and they were my guests, and a lovely home and no water. It's incredible to believe, and I want to give a shout out to Nicole and say thank you for all she's done all these years working with this issue. And ironically, I was going to suggest that you have her on Native American Calling, because after I spoke last week with Lizer, and he seemed to be in support, he thought the whole nation was in support of more coal mining. I remember when coal mining first came to the Navajo Nation, I saw a video of the Arizona Senator John McCain, who wrote the legislative bill that passed and promised to have water delivered to everybody's door on the Navajo Nation. But that didn't happen, and coal mining requires such an abundance of water, and causing all the damage that's happened to all the families in Navajo land that have suffered through this. And then, of course, reclamation was to be part of the deal, but it's never seemed to come about, and coal mines just file bankruptcy, and then the legislature wants another one to come in, and Nicole has led a lot of effort in making people realize those problems. So thank you, Nicole. I appreciate you very much, and good luck with all that. Thank you,
all right, Jen.
Sean.
Thank you, Jen, for calling in. And Nicole, obviously, you've got a lot of supporters out there who are calling in, willing to call into the show and sing your praises. I want to ask you, you're more than welcome to respond to Jen, but I also want to ask you about what it takes to monitor water quality, because I understand your organization does a lot of that water monitoring, and there's so many of these wells, and some of them are hard to locate. What all goes into that to not only test the water, but also advocate for better water quality?
Well, actually, I don't. Well, thanks for that, Jen, and thanks for the other listeners who will also support. But I don't want to make we don't do monitoring. We, as an organization, we don't do monitoring per se, like the way, say, the EPA should be doing it, the EPA or the USGS. For us, for an example, on coal mine lands, we rely on the monitoring that takes place from the USGS. How that got into place, I think people should know, is that when the mine leases were being negotiated, someone in the Department of Interior said that, you know, as the aquifer is going to be used and it's going to be used extensively per the lease agreement, that we think that monitoring should happen. And they directed the USGS to go in and monitor on a regular basis from about 1973 or so all the way to its current. However, since mining has stopped, they've kind of scaled back the amount of monitoring that they're doing. They do, however, continue to collect the data. It's the data that has been collected over this period of time that has really helped us get a better picture of what is happening with the groundwater. This should be the case for every single well that gets drilled across the Navajo Nation. There should be monitoring from a federal agency that is considered a neutral party, as like the USGS is. Somebody that goes and actually takes measurements of what is happening in that particular well, what the quality is, what the quantity is. That's really important. And that gives you a better picture of what's happening over a period of time. I also want to just follow up by saying that monitoring takes funds. It's something that has to, it takes people to actually go out and take these measurements. That requires funding, whether that happens at the tribal level or by a federal agency. I don't think it matters. It'd be nice to see the capacity of the tribe be built up by adding some funds for this kind of work and really putting some of that back in the hands of the nation. But that's just not the case. We don't see funding being added to the tribal budget so that monitoring can happen at this scale. I also want listeners to understand that I do not support just free for all well drilling out there, whether it be for oil or for gas. Okay. I actually am advocating for the end of any more commitment of Navajo water to industry. And I think that's really important. I think that's going to save Navajo water, Dene water into the future, and that's really important.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Let's go back to the phones where we have Julie in Lac du Flambeau, Wisconsin on the line. Hello, Julie.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. What's your comment?
I'm from the Turtle Mountain Reservation, and I've been a defender of water rights for a long time. I was down there in Bad River when we stopped that train, that Crandon mining train. But we're being lied to. What they're telling us is that the earth is going to clean up this water before it gets to the aquifers. It's not. They're using hundreds of chemicals in sand and water.
Who's using the chemicals, Julie? Who are we talking about here? Who's lying and who's using the chemicals?
Fracking companies, coal mining companies, lithium mining companies use extraordinary amounts of water for everything they do. Extraordinary amounts. And it's fresh water. And it's water we're not going to get back unless we stop them. Because right now with this Project 2025 and deregulation, they're coming after Indian lands.
Julie, I understand you have a new well. Is that true?
I do.
How's
had
that
land
working out?
On the Lac du Flambeau Reservation.
How's it working out for you? Is the water okay?
No, it's not. It's not clean water. It's
okay. All right, Julie, appreciate you calling in. Appreciate your passion and picking up that phone and calling. We still got phone lines open, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Heather, I want to go back to you, and I'd like to get your insights with regard to monitoring clean water. What all goes into that? I'd like to get some additional insights. And also, again, we're talking primarily about two tribes today. Of course, there are more than 570 federally recognized tribes across the United States. How much of the Native American population do you think live without access to clean water right now?
I mean, the data is so challenging because there isn't one federal agency or, an organization, and even tribes themselves can have a challenge of collecting, information about every single resident in their community. But there was a report that went out not too long ago that estimated like 30% of Native American households. So we're talking about like hundreds of thousands of people that have some kind of water challenge. And as we've seen throughout this program, right, it can be actual access to water, the quantity of getting that water. It can be quality challenges, right? You have the water, but it's not safe to use. And even when it is safe to use, Jerry talked a little bit about this, it can smell gross. It can have high levels of iron or other things. It can stain your clothes. This is common out in White Mountain Apache community where a lot of tribal members don't buy white clothing because if they put it in their laundry, it'll come out brown, right? And so I guess, going back to kind of what Nicole mentioned, there was some good monitoring that some agencies were doing, but the cuts, their ability to continue to those activities is going to be challenging. Some tribes have built up their capacity with their own water resource management divisions, like Navajo Nation, where many have dedicated water resource agencies, but it again still a challenge. And so we're seeing kind of this patchwork of putting together the information you can of the federal database that might be out there, tribal information being collected. University, Carletta Chief runs an excellent program out of University of Arizona and has done surveys with Navajo water haulers to better understand their access and quality challenges. But, that's what I think organizations like Universal Access to Clean Water, we're trying to make it easier to bring those sources together so that tribes can make informed decisions, pass policy at their tribal level, better engage in state discussions to enforce that responsibility. But yeah, there's no easy answer.
Okay. We got about a minute before we have to wrap up. I want to give Jerry Redfern the last word. And Jerry, your article, what kind of feedback is it generating?
I think mostly like the people I spoke with in the article, it's great surprise. It actually got picked up by a remarkable number of other publications, and it's been republished all across the region. I think everybody's surprised that this is happening on the Navajo Nation.
Do you foresee any new efforts or any new policies or anything that could potentially rectify some of these challenges?
It's a great question. I think what both the other two people were saying there, this gets back to the federal government's responsibilities, and it's hard to see how this particular federal government is going to step up and come up with more money to deal with these sort of issues, considering how they've reacted to other things in the environmental sphere.
All right. Well, with that, we are out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up this conversation. But please go check us out on Facebook. Go to Instagram, Blue Sky, or Threads, or go to our website, nativeamericacalling.com, and you can like, comment, and post with what you thought about today's show. And, of course, big thanks to our guests who joined us, Jerry Redfern, Nicole Horseherder, Vice Chairman Cameron Runnels, and Heather Tanana. All of them joined us and shared their insights on Native America Calling. And please don't forget to tune in again tomorrow as we get a snapshot of the health and status of the current tribal gaming industry. I'm Sean Spruce. We'll talk again soon.
Support by the IAIA Museum of Contemporary Native Arts, MOCNA, open during the 2025 Swaya Santa Fe Indian Market, August 15th through the 17th. New exhibitions will be on view, and there will be panel discussions from Indigenous perspectives and demonstrations by Indigenous artists. With no admission charge on Fridays, MOCNA is located in downtown Santa Fe and online at iai.edu/mocna.
Skugdash, amo ichukshag a walk, kamoy oiga apadak, him da go what se has urdak go to that wujud. Chpi match mahascho am the bite him, not taichum of the Mahoma winyo, da boy mgokaya boy ida, amo ihachishuga am healthcare.gov/coverage. Amo ihagugat am homoko gigi, sikor, wai homoko, gigi gog, hutas pumuk jut, idop am jut him Medicare Medicaid hachipka.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.